Now, because of their actions, the tree of life was hedged up. The way to the tree of life was hedged up because of their actions. Looking at Proverbs 15, the culture of that tree was supposed to keep them guarded. The culture of that tree of life was supposed to keep them grounded in the experience and in the philosophy that they were supposed to advance in. Proverbs 15:24. Proverbs 15:24 reads, "The way of life is above to the wise, that he may depart from the hell beneath." That tree of life was an experience that was inward, that was for the mind, that was supposed to keep the mind and keep the inward person above the world. And when I say world, again, this is not literal natural world. This is the religious world. The way of the tree of life, when taken in, was supposed to take what is within upwards, to escape what is below. Now, what is below? What is below 1 John 2:15 and 16? 1 John 2:15 and 16, "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. All that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but of the world." Now, above the religious world, above the world, is an experience that is without the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Above the religious world is an experience that says, "Create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me." Beneath, within the religious world, is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And all of this sounds oddly familiar to Genesis 3 and verse 6. Everything that is said in that 1 John verse, that's 1 John 2:15 and 16, it is definitely similar to what is said in Genesis 3 verse 6, where it says, "And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise." The same thing that the author writing that first book of John is saying, that's what is being said in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6. The culture is supposed to be different. They were supposed to escape that culture. They were supposed to escape that culture of wanting to be gods. Instead of wanting to be gods, and instead of wanting to know good and evil for the purpose of making sure that godship, that God state is maintained, cleanliness of what is within was supposed to be the experience. Life, the philosophy of that tree, wisdom within the inward parts, truth in the hidden part, creation of a new mind and of a new spirit from within. They didn't want that. They didn't want that because that's not where they originally came from. They originally came from Genesis chapter 1, which is a landscape of being gods, which is a landscape not of the knowledge of life, but of the knowledge of good and evil. They should have been more prepared for the stimulus that tree that was accursed gave, but they were not. And because they were not that mindful, they took steps towards what they were brought out of, and which is supposed to be a lesson for us concerning justification. All of these illustrations pointing to what the conversation is to be justified from. That's pretty much the value of them. And when you jump down to Genesis 3 and 7, we get to find out what that stimulus within the religious world is in a more concrete way. Genesis 3 and verse 7 reads, "The eyes of them both were opened. They knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons." Now, when the stimulus of the religious world hits, we will want to create aprons for ourselves. And apron, as it is here in context, not the apron you may be thinking about with a chef who's cooking. Although for such an apron, if we do want to put that illustration in there, what's left out is the back. Front is covered, back is open. You're not that all protected or covered. But in context, this word apron, it's not what we may think as in a chef cooking or a cook cooking. This word apron, it actually means or can be translated to, in right context, girdle. The apron that they sewed unto themselves. The apron that they sewed unto themselves was a girdle. The opening of their eyes helped them to realize that they were naked, and we will see what that means. But in realizing what that nakedness is, it compelled them to create aprons unto themselves, or I should say, girdles unto themselves. This should be a familiar term to us. Exodus 28 and verse 4. Exodus 28 and verse 4 reads, "And these are the garments which they shall make, a breastplate, an ephod, and a robe, a broidered coat, a mitre, and a girdle. They shall make holy garments for Aaron thy brother and his sons, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office." When we think girdle, of which apron can rightly be translated to, we are immediately brought into the context of priesthood. Girdle is the thing that the priest wore around the waist to cover the loin. These are the aprons that they created. Now, the figurative illustration here, the author of the book of Genesis in this scene is pointing out. Revelation 1 and chapter 1 and verse 12 and 13. Revelation chapter 1 verses 12 and 13. "And I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned I saw 7 golden candlesticks. In the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed how? How was he dressed? In the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle." This idea of girdle, whether it is going from the paps to the loins, it is a girdle, it is a garment worn by priests. The Son of Man here in the book of the Revelation, as seen in vision, is appearing as a priest. The opening of their eyes, which was the transcendence of being now gods, or having the state of gods, or wanting to be gods and knowing good and evil, it led them to see their nakedness, and seeing their nakedness, to cover their nakedness by aprons or by girdles. The author of the book of Genesis is telling a story. They are telling ecclesiastical history through colorful language. They're using colorful language to get across a very concrete and solid point about what will happen when the kind of man that the author of the book of Genesis is talking about in chapter 1, in chapter 2, and in chapter 3 begins to feed on the philosophy of that false prophet, that recurring generational false prophet. When they feed on it, the desire is a desire to priesthood, to the continuance of what the image of God is. And knowing good and evil being a concept, not anything that has to do with literal morality for good, literal morality for evil. Good and evil is put together as one for a concept where predicted outcome is established from preconceived or prior placed action. When you put these two things together, what you get is the establishment of priesthood, and there can be no other outcome. There can be no other outcome than creating a girdle or an apron for such act as is in that 3rd chapter, than priesthood. The opening of the eyes, the stimulus of the religious world that the serpent gave, that Balaam figure gave, it moved them to create unto themselves a girdle. And that girdle, most famously associated with priesthood, author of the book of Genesis is letting us know that from the moment that kind of man consumes the philosophy of that serpent, they will be encouraged to move into the terrain of priesthood for the purpose of continuing concept of expected outcome from predicted or preconceived action. Or it will be well to cover up nakedness by religious law. But what does it mean to be naked?